Imagine this. You're being held at gunpoint. The fear grips your every thought. You don't know if you'll survive the next few minutes, let alone the next few days. But something strange begins to happen. The very person who threatens your life suddenly becomes the person you trust the most. This isn't just a nightmare, this is real. This is Stockholm Syndrome. In 1973, one of the most bizarre and terrifying true crime cases unraveled in the heart of Stockholm, Sweden. A simple bank robbery turned into a psychological phenomenon that would shock the world. But how does a victim start to feel affection for their captor? Let's dive into the twisted, captivating story that gave rise to one of psychology's most disturbing terms. August 23, 1973. It seemed like an ordinary morning in Stockholm. But as the day unfolded, the city would never be the same. A man named Jan Erik Olsson walked into the credit bank and armed with a submachine gun. His plan was to rob the bank, but what started as a heist quickly spiraled into a hostage situation that would last 6 long days and give birth to a psychological mystery. Olsson wasn't just an ordinary criminal. He was cold, calculating, and dangerous. Taking 4 bank employees hostage, Olsson barricaded himself inside, demanding money and the release of his former cellmate, Clark Olofsson. The police complied, hoping to de-escalate the situation. But as the days dragged on, something deeply unsettling began to unfold. Inside that bank, a psychological transformation was taking place. The hostages, terrified and desperate, started to sympathize with their captors. They began to see the police as the enemy, and the men with guns as their protectors. The hostages later described feeling a sense of confusion and fear so intense that it warped their perception of reality. One hostage, Kristen Enmark, said she was more afraid of the police storming the bank than of the gunmen holding her at gunpoint. She described Olsson and Olofsson not as criminals but as protectors. People who had shown them more kindness than the outside world.
It was as though he'd taken care of me. He was the one who ensured that I wasn't harmed. He wasn't evil. He was simply misunderstood. The police were the real danger.
Day after day, negotiations dragged on. The hostages, locked in a vault with their captors, began to form an emotional bond. The world watched in shock. How could these innocent people, trapped in a nightmare, start to care for the very men who had taken them hostage? This strange bond eventually became known as Stockholm Syndrome, a psychological phenomenon where hostages begin to empathize and even develop affection for their captors. But it wasn't just a term. It was happening right in front of the world. On August 28th, 6 days after the ordeal began, the police finally stormed the bank. The hostages were freed, but the aftermath was perhaps even more shocking than the crisis itself. Rather than expressing gratitude to the police for their rescue, the hostages showed concern for their captors. Some even refused to testify against them in court. They had become emotionally attached. Some felt protective of the men who had once threatened their lives. How could this be possible? Was it survival instinct gone wrong? A desperate attempt to find safety in a dangerous world, or something more sinister at play within the human mind? Psychologists have since studied Stockholm Syndrome extensively, trying to understand why and how it happens. Is it a coping mechanism in the face of extreme stress? A way for the mind to adapt to impossible circumstances? Or is it something buried deep in our psyche, an ancient instinct for survival that goes awry under extreme pressure. But perhaps the most troubling question is this: could it happen to anyone? Could we all, under the right or wrong circumstances, find ourselves forming bonds with those who would do us harm? For the hostages inside that Stockholm bank, the answer was clear. Even after their release, their bond with their captors remained strong. One hostage even visited Olsen in prison. The man who had once held her life in his hands was now, somehow, a friend. Stockholm Syndrome is more than just a term. It's a reminder of how fragile the human mind can be under extreme circumstances, and how easily we can be drawn into the darkest corners of our psyche when fear and confusion take over. What would you do in a situation like this? Could you find yourself sympathizing with the very people who threaten your life? Tell us what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to 0 Hour Files True Crime for more stories that dive deep into the darkest, most twisted corners of the human mind. This is where crime meets the unexpected. We'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.